Hello everybody, my name is Melissa Konopko. I am one of the technical program managers at the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, also known as GA4GH. We are the standard setting organization in the omics data sharing space. And one of the groups that we have working with us is the Data Use and Researcher Identification team, which is working on creating tools for automating data access. And they have created the Data Use Ontology. And we are going to present to you its background, how it was created, and a lot of the ways in which it's been used today. And as a housekeeping note, questions will be answered at the end. On the bottom of your screen, you should see a box that says Q&A. Feel free to type in your questions and we will get to them at the end. And so we have a wonderful group of people who are going to be speaking on how they've applied it in their systems, all the way from data collection to data dissemination. And we're very lucky to have such a broad view globally. Melanie, who is one of the people who runs the data use team, is going to be starting with an overview of the data use ontology. Over to Melanie.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everybody. It's great to see so many people joining us and showing interest in the project. So thank you all for being here today with us. So my name is Melanie Courteau. I work at EMBL-EBI in Cambridge, UK. I'm a metadata standards coordinator, which means I care about making data better when I can. And today, specifically, I will give you a very high-level overview of DUO before handing over to my wonderful colleagues that are here today to tell you about how we've practically used it in their various resources. Feel free to tweet at any time, send me an email if you want more information, ask questions, we're here to help. So I wanted to start by just taking a little bit of a step back and thinking about why is actually DUO important and why should you care really, and why does the Global Alliance for Genomics and Healthcare? So if we look back into the general vision, it's really moving away from the current paradigm, which is about people finding data and downloading it locally and trying to do things locally. And it's okay if things are a little bit asynchronous in that context, to the new paradigm and the new vision for the GA4GH, which is researcher being able to access data instantly on the cloud and run their analysis and find out the data pretty much on a real-time basis. And what we find out when we consider that vision of the Global Alliance is that there's a need to take into account, on the next slide, Melissa, the current model for data access. So on the one hand side, we have data depositor who are preparing the data for submission. They are joining a data use limitation letter, which encapsulates the data use restriction on those data set, and they submit those to a data access committee. On the other side, the data requesters are coming in. They're saying, hey, I want to do some research, and here are my research purposes. They encapsulate that in data access request, and in the middle, the blue bubble here is the data access committee, where people like Haley, who is here with us today, is sitting and deciding manually who should have access to what data. And these two sides have to be manually reconciled by that data access committee. And this comes with a very specific set of challenges. On the next slide, Melissa. On the one hand side, the language from the consent forms, which is used by the data depositor, needs to be interpreted by the depositor and the data access committee. And on the other hand side, the process to actually make the request and get access to the request can be very long. Tiffany, Haley, and Adrian will tell you a little bit later about the issue on the consent form sides, while Jonathan will tell you and give you more detail about the data requester and access request, how they practically works. On the next slide, so we knew the issues, and one of the great strengths of GA4GH and the Data Use Ontology is that community of people who pretty much had similar problem, who decided to come together. And this is really the point in time I want to say thank you to all those people, because DUO is not one person or one effort. It's really a group of people coming together to deliver that standard, to work on use cases, to formalize those use cases, and also to implement against those use cases. And we are very lucky today that we have many of them on the call to help us later answer questions. This is also my time to make a call to attendees today. Please join us, contribute. DUO is an evolving project. We'd love to have your input. We'd love to hear your needs, things that we're doing well, things that we're not doing so well. Please join us. Feel free to email Melissa at any time. She will add you to the mailing list. She will include you in the teleconferences. This wouldn't happen further without your input. On the next slide, I also wanted to say that, there's people behind DUO, but there's also pre-existing work. And I really wanted to take the time here to acknowledge past projects which have informed the development of the data use ontology. First, the DB gap control vocabulary from NCBI, the survey of consent code, which Stephanie Dyke, NCBI, EGA, and the GA4GH regulatory group led, as well as ADAM, the automated data access matrix, which was led by Anthony Brooks, who is also on the call today, as well as the ADAM workstream. And those all came together and let us inform the development of the data use ontology under the umbrella of the data use researcher ID workstream for GA4GH, as Melissa said earlier. So in 2017, we said, let's come together, create a GitHub repository, start joint development, and we generated the first version of DUO based on the consent codes. In 2008, this continued to evolve. We've included terms from ADAM. We've adapted to address use cases from NIH driver project and from EGA. And Aina is on the call today to tell us a little bit more about the EGA use case later on. And finally, this all came together early 2019, where DUO was approved as a GA4GH standard. So on the next slide, I have told you why and what is DUO and how, and I want to just give a very practical overview of DUO. This is what DUO looks like. If you use one of our ID, and an example is here at the top, if you click on that link, you will end up on that page. And that page shows you the view, the human-facing view of DUO in the ontology lookup service here at EVI. I will not go into the very technical details. I'm happy to answer questions around that if there are any. I really wanted to stay on the human-facing view in the interest of time. So here you can see that each term has an ID. Those IDs are unique, they're stable, they're persisting through times. What it means is that once we create an ID, we don't delete it. The terms meanings remain consistent, so there's no way that DUO 7 will start meaning something different than disease-specific research. If a term needs to be removed, we have processes, standard processes in place to do that. We deprecate terms, but again, the ID remain. What that means is that you, as a user of the data use ontology, can be confident that through time, you can access the same term and the same meaning consistently. So there's no bad surprise there. On the next slide, because we do want humans to be able to use the ontology, such as people from data access committee, we have labels on each of the terms, so clear, unique labels. And on the next slide, we also have unambiguous definition for each of the terms. So this is all to help people who are either writing consent form or research purposes to choose the best term in the ontology. I also wanted to show you, sorry, on the next slides, going back, the DUO is an ontology, so it's organized as a hierarchy. Keep that in mind. I will tell you a little bit later why that hierarchical organization of the ontology matters for use cases. So on the next slide, Melissa, please. Practically, how does it work? And how does DUO support that vision that Global Alliance has with respect to sharing the data? So if you use DUO, we can standardize and we can accelerate the discovery of the data to the access process. So really streamlining that pipeline and making it easier and faster. So the first step in doing that Data owner, people who have data repository, and again, we'll get a couple examples later, can tag their data set unambiguously using the DUO codes, and those DUO codes represent the data use restriction on those data sets. Soichi-san from Japan will also give us an example later of how they have done that in their own data sets in GEM Japan. On the next slide, once you have done that, this means you can discover the data. So somebody can come and query and say, do you have any data I can use to study cancer? And you're able to answer that automatically. And finally, that same discovery algorithm on the third step allows you to request access automatically to the data set and match your request, your research purposes with the restriction on the data set and grant you access to the data as you go. Here's a simple example, and again, I wanted to highlight that Jonathan will give you a way more real-life example, but really just to have the right idea. Somebody comes in and say, I want to study melanoma against the data repository with those data sets, with those restrictions. The DUO-based algorithm on the next page can really see, okay, well, this is where in the DUO hierarchy, and this is where the hierarchy I mentioned earlier comes into play, the disease-specific restriction for melanoma comes in, and that means the algorithm can kind of cut it right at that level, and walking up, say, okay, this is fine, you can have access to that, and you can have access to parents of that, you can have access to cancer data set, or you can have access to general research use data sets, and at the same time cut down on diseases that are more specific or unrelated disease, such as diabetes here. So again, Jonathan will talk about this in detail. I just wanted to mention that this is one side of the access of data process. The other side is about the researcher identity, which is also worked by a work stream. And Michael Linden will talk a little bit about that later on as well. On the next slide, I just wanted to say that, on the next slide again, sorry, if you want more information about DUO, we have that GitHub repository, things are tested, we test for consistency, we release, everything is there, our documentation is there. If you have issues or suggestions, there's an issue tracker there, feel free to contact us. And finally, on the next slide, I'd like again to invite you to join us. Please email Melissa. She will add you to the right mailing list. She will include you in conferences if you're interested in presenting your work. We'd love to have you join us. And with this, I'd like to hand over to the community of people who have been co-developing and using the Data Use Ontology. And first up is my co-chair, Jonathan, who will tell us about the DUO system at the Broad Institute. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. Hi, everyone. As Melanie said, my name is Jonathan Lawson. I'm a software product manager at the Broad Institute here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I want to start today, Melissa, you can go to the next slide. Start today talking not just about what we're doing with Duos, which is an interesting piece of software for helping us in the data access request space, but really by kind of framing down another level of detail into the issue that we're trying to address. So just taking an example from the dbGaP data access request process. Currently today, a researcher would go into dbGaP, would select certain data sets they'd like to request access to, prepare their data access requests, and then send that to a signing official. And that signing official is actually, right, not a member of the data access committee or at NIH, but is their own institution signing official who then has to review their data access request, approve it, and then it is sent to the appropriate NIH data access committee. In a lot of cases, we see that institutional sign-off can take 1 to 4 to weeks to many months. In some cases, as we piloted our Duo software, we've asked them for their signing official's approval and never heard from them again. So we know that this is an opportunity for many researchers to sort of fall off the data access request pipeline, and then also DACs, especially those which are non-professional DACs, so maybe those outside of those at NIH, are often researchers and or their project teams who would then need to assemble a DAC on data deposition and other repositories who may not have defined processes and are therefore somewhat less efficient in turning around decisions on data access requests for their data. So just wanted to call out there, these are some of the main issues. One, a researcher needed to track down their signing official, and two, the data access committee's turnaround time. So what we're doing, and this highlights not only the work of the data use group that we're talking about today, but also the other side, again, that Melanie mentioned, I think Mikhail is going to talk about further, but is really how the solutions, what the solutions are for getting this institutional signing official approval and for expediting the data access committee's decision. So what we're doing now at the Broad, and in the context of using Duos, we're piloting what we call a library card, which is a early version of what Mikhail is going to talk about, which is just adding a claim type to a researcher, which is actually the pre-authorization of their ability to make a data access request. So their signing official would add them to a whitelist, and at that point, they would then be able to go forward and to make data access requests for the next year, so it'd be a renewable status, without further approval from their signing official. So they could go forth and make as many data access requests as they like without having to go back to the signing official each time. So you can imagine that that speeds up that part of the process quite quickly. And then what we have in Duos, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in detail, is the ability to use the data use ontology, which Melanie highlighted, and to use that ontological tree structure to help us automate data access request decisions. Next slide, please. So the way that we do this in Duos is we take those data use limitations, which come in from groups who are depositing data into a repository, and we structure those data use limitations according to the GA4GH Duo. And we do that in a way that is then computer readable. And then when we have a researcher who comes into Duos, we allow them to create a data access request, very similar to what you may see in dbGaP or in other systems, to formally prepare that. But then we also have ways in which the researcher is able to go through a series of questions and to actually also structure their research purpose according to the data use ontology terms. So then what we have are computer readable terms for both the data use limitations and the research purpose. And then what we're able to do is to use an algorithm to compare those to see if the researcher's data access requests structured terms are within the bounds of the data use limitations set by the data depositor. Now, we're piloting this, so we also have interfaces in Duos for human data access committees to go through these data access request reviews as they typically would. We've been piloting this at the Broad for a little over a year, and also are working with groups at NIH, including NHGRI and NHLBI, who are giving us great feedback on how to improve this process and how to use it. And I would say early on, we've actually seen some great success, particularly at the Broad, where we have more formal results. Melissa, you can go forward. So just wanted to call this out and say, so in this issue, and you'll see on the left and on the right boxes of structuring both the data use limitations and the researcher's data access requests, we've been able to do so with pretty high precision. This is with a pretty small n in terms of data access requests. I think we've seen about 40 through the system, so just to be clear on that. But then on the data deposition side, we've tried to structure just over 120 data use letters. And then in those actual data access requests that were submitted, we found that the data access committee, the matching algorithm, again, in those nearly 40 cases, agreed every time. So we've had some pretty early success. And then what I want to do now, just quickly, is to actually take over here, and I want to give a quick demo of Duos. And this will just show you quickly what the data access request process is like. So here I am in Duos and logged in as a researcher. And you'll see I'm able to view our dataset catalog. This is the live in the world instance of Duos. So any of you on the call today are actually able to go to this website and to check it out for yourselves. So for brevity's sake, I won't dive into all the details, but you're welcome to poke around and to ask questions later. So if I were a researcher, I'd go here and I'd go ahead and select a few data sets which I find interesting and I may like to request access to. I'm able to hit apply for access, and then I'm taken to this data access request application wizard, where I can go through some of my profile information is already pre-populated here. I'm also, I'd just like to note, able to authenticate with ERA comments here, which is a way that we're able to validate that researchers have that library card that we discussed earlier. More on that later as that begins to roll out. And then I can go through and I can start creating a project. So I'll just mock up some information here and describe it. And you'll notice in this page, the data sets that I picked are automatically loaded. So that those are remembered here. And then what I'm able to do is just to go through, and you can imagine a really nice research statement written out here describing my science, a non-technical summary in a slightly less detail. And then I'm able to go through these questions, which I mentioned earlier, where I structure my research use statement according to the data use ontology. So I could say I'm doing disease-specific research on cancer, and then move forward. Here, I could say I am not doing any commercial-related research, so I am working for a nonprofit. I don't have any gender or population-specific questions here. And then I'll go through these questions pretty quickly, which are actually to let us know if we should bypass the intent to adjudicate this DAR with the algorithm. So if any of these stigmatizing illnesses or diseases or population patterns are a part of my research purpose, we would not try and adjudicate this DAR with the algorithm. So you can see here the attestation statement from DUOs, and any other data access committees are able to also put their own codes of conduct here. And once that is done, I'm able to attest and send this directly to a DAC. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing and hand it over to the next person.
Hi, my name is Soichi Ogishima from Tohoku Medical Mega Organization, Japan. So I'd like to briefly introduce our project as for in the GM Japan driver project. So next slide, please. Yes, how do is becoming part of our system. So in Japan, there are over 50 biobanks storing high quality biospecimen and data, and among them there are several major biobanks and several clinical biobanks. So for promotion of use of biospecimen and data in biobanks, so we have studied a new project aiming at the development of the biobank network connecting the 3 major biobanks and the clinical biobanks in Japan by the cross-search system of the biospecimen and data, and aiming at the one-stop service to fast access to the biospecimen data. So we already have developed our biobank cross-search system. So, and we launch our service next month. So now over 600,000 biospecimen and 200,000 data provided by the 300,000 participants are already available in our cross-search system in our biobank network. So for academic and industrial users, our biobank network will provide a biobank cross-search service for finding the biospecimen and data in our biobanks. And the user can search biospecimen data with the condition of the, as you can see, that's the sex, disease history, biospecimen type, disease name, and the age, data type, vendor, and platform. So, and if user can find the suitable biospecimen data, they can inquiry to each biobank and will access the biospecimen data in each biobank. So users are required to log in before using our service. This user login is a kind of the research identification process. Today, it's not a topic in this webinar, but we are also very interested in the controlling the passport to the access to the data. The next slide, please. Yes, thank you. And the as for data, so we have a biospecimen data, but as for data, so our biobank network is planning to provide a catalog of data with data use terms coded by DUO. So we have mapped the data use terms to DUO codes in the AMED GA4GH Japan workshop 2019 in Sendai. So with great help by Melanie, very thank you, and my colleagues in Japan. So not only data type, vendor, platform, but also the data terms in your codes will be available as search condition in our biobank cross search system. So researchers can easily find the appropriate data. So looking up just your codes. So it's very easy to access to our data. And the industry users are very interested in whether the commercial use is allowed or not. So we hope that our biobank network will provide automatic matching of data and data use by using the dual codes. So how Duo benefits us? It of course provides a framework for the smooth data access for researchers, especially for industry users, and we are also participating in implementing these standards for data access, so we can feedback our experiences to Duo development as an Asian use case. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be participating in this discussion today. My name's Tiffany Bortwood. I'm here today representing Australian Genomics, which is the National Genomic Research Initiative in Australia. And we're in the process of enrolling thousands of participants into a range of clinical projects looking at rare diseases and cancer and reproductive carrier screening. And in order to support this recruitment, of course, we're developing a range of data management tools and research access tools. And a key tool in this armamentarium is our participant portal, which is an online decision-making portal that provides our research participants the means to have dynamic, granular choice and consent around the use of their data for downstream research. And we're using Duo as the means to provide the machine-readable control to those participant choices at the back end. So in this process, we've been putting effort into coming up with some good sort of plain language descriptions of Duo codes and also examples. So rather than divorcing the choice of the participant from the Duo code at the back end and the eventual data use, we're enabling participants to actually have control over the whole process. Next slide, please. So this is just a representation of the mobile sort of representation of the control platform, as we call it. You can see that different consent options with sort of Duo representation are provided in those panels. And the little arrow depicts where further information can be clicked on by the participant, and they get descriptions in a much more detailed fashion with examples of what these codes might mean in terms of their eventual data use. Next slide, please. So how Duo benefits us? Well, as it's stated on the slide, it does provide a framework for our participants that we're working with participant-led choice in health data access. And this is in an individual, real-time, granular level. And I saw a question online from Peter along those lines. So beyond that, I think applying Duo gives us confidence around this future-proofing of data access. And just to reiterate Melanie's call to arms, it's very important from the Australian Genomics perspective that we're not only applying standards of the GA4GH, but we really value the opportunity to contribute to their development and piloting to ensure that they're fit for purpose for our own research. And I'd certainly encourage others online now to also contribute to that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. So now we have an example use case from Aina on the European Genomics Phenome Archive.
Yep. Hi, everybody. My name is Aina Jane. I'm working as a submission specialist at the European Genome Phenome Archive at the CRG. First of all, I would like you to introduce to the schema. Yeah, thank you. of the objects of a regular submission at the EGA. So as you can see, we already have an object that it's called policy, that in this object we store the information for the terms and conditions for certain data. And when we started implementing the dual codes, we start adding these dual codes to the policy structure, which as you can see, it's also directly linked to the DAG and to the data set. So in the next slide, please, you will see how we implement these dual codes in the submission. So first of all, what we do is we provide our users with a link to the code table, which is in the image of the right. In this table, you can find the codes and its corresponding level. And after the users check this table, they can contact the help desk team. So we will add the requested codes by our users to their policies. However, in the near future, we will implement this feature in our submitter portal tool, so our users will be able to add these codes themselves, or actually this dual codes structure is already ready in the policy XSD, meaning that all our users can add their own dual codes using the programmatic submission via XML. Currently, we have over 58 policies with dual codes, which involves over 400 data sets. Also, in the next slide, I would like to show you, thank you, how is it displayed, these dual codes in our EGA web page. So in here, you can see two scenarios. The one on the left, it's for a data set. If somebody is looking for a certain data set that happens to be tagged with dual codes, in here you will see a part of the web page that it's for data use conditions, where you can find the level, the codes, the version, and the modifier if it's needed for the usage for this data. And on the right side, or the right part of the screen, you can see for the dual codes. This means that if you want to search which data sets we have under a certain specific dual code, you only have to write the dual code in our search bar, and then you will have the data sets displayed in the results list. So to sum up, this is, oh yeah, sorry. To sum up, it's just that the dual codes makes the process to data request easier for our users. So thank you.
Thanks, Heina. We are moving on to Hayley to give us a perspective on the Data Access Committee at the Wellcome Sanger Institute.
Thanks, Melanie. Hi, everyone. So I'm Hayley. I handle our data sharing work at Sanger, at the Sanger Institute, and I'm also the Sanger DAC. So I'm going to start off talking about how we've applied DURI to data sets that we've already got in the EGA and those that we're already sharing with external researchers. So we have around 1,000 data sets in the EGA, and we've applied DURI to about a third of these. And we've applied them to our cancer data sets because we basically started off with the lowest hanging fruit, because a majority of our cancer data sets fall under the same data access agreement, and they all have the same usage restrictions. So things like research purposes only, use for health and biomedical research, things like that. So you can see on the screenshot an example of a cancer data set that we have in the EGA, which have got DURI applied to it. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we still need to apply DURI to the remaining 2/3 of our data sets, which is around about 600. These ones are a little bit more tricky because they fall under 7 different data access agreements, and they have different usage restrictions. And these usage restrictions are currently inputted as free text. And so we need to go through each of these individually to apply DURI to the data sets. So to make this a little bit simpler, what we've done is we've filtered and grouped the data sets according to any usage restrictions that they might have. And therefore we can apply DURI to them in smaller groups. But it's obviously really important that we need to apply the correct DURI terms to each data set. So we need to carefully review them before we go live. So now I'm going to talk about how we're going to apply DURI to our data sets in the future. So at the moment we have a data sharing portal called EDAM, and this has both an internal and an external facing site. internally it's used to set up data access agreements, and externally it's used for external researchers to submit a data access request. When a new data set has been generated and it becomes available in the EGA, it's our research administrators who work within the research programs at Sanger who manually input information about the data sets in EDAM and subsequently in the data access agreement. So they put in things like security levels, descriptions, and most importantly here, the usage restrictions. And at the moment, this is just a free text entry box. And so you can see from the screenshot here that sometimes the usage restrictions can be really lengthy, and they might be using abbreviations and acronyms that the researchers themselves understand, but not necessarily non-researchers or people outside of the field. So in the future, what we're hoping to do is to train the research administrators to using DUO, and also modify our system EDAM in such a way that datasets can be tagged with DUO as and when they become available for sharing with other researchers. Next slide, please. So DUO has benefited us already and is likely to continue doing so in the future. So firstly, using DUO avoids any confusion and inconsistencies with interpreting usage restrictions, because currently they're inputted manually as free text. But then also secondly, by having our datasets tagged with DUO makes them more findable for other researchers who might want to use them in their own research. And so this can be done by using the EGA, the DUO search function in the EGA that Aina just spoke about. And this is obviously really beneficial for Sanger because it gets more researchers using our datasets, and that's why we put them out there. So that's me.
Thanks, Hayley, that was great. Mikael from Elixir Finland will tell us about this integration between Researcher ID and DUO. Over to you, Mikael.
So I'm Mikael Linden from the Finnish Elixir node, and I'm the co-task leader of Elixir AAI, which is the Elixir service for authenticating researchers and helping the relying services like data holders to decide what the researchers are permitted to do. So this speak is about another DURI workstream product, which used to be called Researcher ID Claims, but now there's a proposal on the table to rename it as Global Alliance Passport specification. It's work in progress, intention to submit to the next Global Alliance Steering Committee meeting. And the intention is that this specification describes an authenticated researcher's properties that are relevant for managing their access rights on data, especially for controlled access data and registered access data. And the intention is to help the data holder to manage the data access control process. The passports are mounted on other Global Alliance specification called AAI profile that's managed by the security workstream. In the right-hand side, you can see some examples on passports. The first one is for controlled access data, where basically the DAC gives a visa, passport visa, to describe that the holder of this visa has permission to access this controlled access dataset. And the second example is for registered access, where the home organization signing official asserts that this person has the bona fide status as described by the URI in the value field. Next slide. So I was asked that what's the relationship of DUO and the passport specification? And to frame this question, I drew this diagram. In the low, you can see the yellow arrows, which split the process to 3 phases. First phase is discovery phase, where a researcher identifies the datasets they want to apply for access. Second phase is the DAC process, where the researcher files and the data access committee approves the data access application. And the third phase is the data access and use phase, where the researcher actually uses the access rights traditionally by downloading datasets to their own environment, but now it's more common that the data is made available, the data or the copy is made available to research in some computing environment. So the second row in the diagram describes my understanding of DUO spec in those three spaces. So for the discovery phase, DUO is an obvious match. It's used for finding the data sets that match the researcher's internet research purpose. And for DACO process, DUO spec can be used for applying access rights and automating the data access approval process like the demo that Jonathan just showed us. For the data access and use phase, I'm not sure if DUO has any role, because in the data access phase, it's the data access committee decision to approve the data access application that matters. And DUO isn't applied there anymore. And the first row describes my understanding of the passport specifications role. So in discovery phase, passport specification has no role. You don't need to be an authenticated researcher to discover your datasets, unless if you use registered access, like registered access beacons for discovering the datasets. However, in the DACO process phase, you probably want to log in to the system that manages the data access applications using the passport broker that supports Global Alliance passports. I think in the demo that Jonathan showed, there was a button for ERA Commons login, and that's the role of the passport here, to use Global Alliance passport instead. And the intention, previous slide please. The intention is that the passport broker can also consume passport claims or visas, like this person is good for applying for controlled access data as asserted by their home organization signing official. And finally, when the DAC approves the data access application, another passport visa is issued for the user. We call it controlled access grants, which describes that this user is good for accessing this and that controlled access data object. And it is the key claim or visa to be consumed by the data holder when the user wants to access the data in the computing environment.
Fantastic, thanks, Michael. Last today is Adrian Forgood from the Regulatory and Ethics Workstream, who will tell us about the consent policy and aligning with DUO.
Thanks, Melanie. So go next slide, please. Okay, so I guess I could start off by just starting with the exciting announcement that the Global Alliance Regulatory and Ethics Workstream has a few days ago released an updated version of our consent policy. So it's a 2019 version. Again, our consent policy emphasizes the importance of promoting the public good of international data sharing, but doing so in a responsible and respectful way. So importantly, with consent, it's about respecting the autonomous choices of data subjects, including patients and participants. So of course, in order to, there's a lot of emphasis nowadays on increasing transparency about how we're sharing data, both within laws and also this is sort of a result of engaging with patients and participants about their views on data sharing. So this is really something we emphasize in the consent policy, that it's really important that researchers clearly describe their data sharing plans, and also the associated conditions that will accompany data sharing, and that these are described clearly and transparently. Now, of course, we have this amazing tool now, the DUO, to allow us to clearly communicate and track and also act on use conditions across distributed research ecosystems. Now, of course, the challenge is ensuring that the messy world of consent language and consent drafting actually maps to the DUO, so that both the commitments to share data as well as commitments to share data responsibly under certain conditions are respected across those distributed research ecosystems. So I think a next step, we'll stay on that slide, please. So a next step is really for us to, we're looking now to see how the existence of the DUO is going to affect how we encourage researchers and research teams to draft consents going forward. And so if the consents are clear, and I mean clear in a way that can be unambiguously mapped to the DUO standard, this can have a lot of benefits. First, it really encourages researchers to plan ahead for data sharing. So to have a really clear plan about this is how broadly we plan to share, and these are the potential conditions or limitations that we're going to impose in our specific context. And this has a great benefit for sort of a DUO-inspired consent drafting, has a great benefit for data subjects, because it means we can be more transparent with them at the time of sample or data collection. And of course, a real helpful benefit is that if we have these clear consent forms that do map clearly to DUO, this makes the job of oversight bodies such as our IRBs or data access committees much easier when it comes to their decision to release data for or to provide access to data down the road, because they have these clear consent forms, and they know exactly under what conditions they can share and they can't. Right now, it's a real challenge for DACs to have to continuously go back and read consent forms and try and interpret them, and often the language is quite ambiguous. And of course, once our consents are captured in a way that maps to DUO, then we can really get all the benefits of the DUO, which is both to ensure that data is broadly shared, to promote research or accelerate research, but also to that any commitments made to participants to limit sharing or to impose responsible conditions on sharing are respected. Next slide, please. So we're actively exploring with the DUO, the existence of the DUO, we're actively exploring now how do we improve the process of consent drafting, both just for general purposes of clarity and transparency, but also to really enable the effectiveness of the DUO and close this gap between the natural consent language and how we represent use conditions within data sharing infrastructure. And so really the focus here, we are looking into exploring potentially partnering with IRBs as well as funders who design consent templates that researchers rely on to when they're drafting their project consent forms, to see if we can encourage, provide some guidance as well as some consent language that could then hopefully be adopted in consent forms that would be clear and would map to DUO. Next slide, please. I would also highlight, so that's for the future. That's knowing that we have DUO, this is really starting to inform how we approach drafting consents in the first place. What about legacy collections of samples and data? What about all the data that's already available or that has already been produced? Our Global Alliance consent policy also addresses how do we balance data sharing with respecting the autonomy of data subjects when it comes to existing collections. And so again, the aim is to share maximally while respecting existing commitments that have been made to data subjects. Now, I'd just like to highlight that we need to be a bit careful before we rush ahead and start capturing a whole set of limitations and conditions associated with data sharing. We already have a very evolved process in how do we approach legacy collections. So first, I think it's important to take steps to determine how broadly we can share data, and really with this goal of promoting data sharing. So for existing collections, we encourage an assessment of the existing consent forms and to determine, do they allow data sharing? Do they allow a broader data sharing within a consortium? If the consent forms are silent, then we encourage, as a first step before we move on to DUO, that we really researchers attempt to renew their permissions. So perhaps by anonymizing data, we could remove some legal conditions on data. We can seek renewed permission from participants through reconsent. And in some cases, if there's a strong benefit justification and low risks, in some jurisdictions, you may be able to receive an ethics waiver to modify your data sharing plan and share more broadly if that's considered ethical. And it's really at that point that DUO comes into the picture and is really helpful. So whatever remaining conditions at that point, this is where it's important that people, oversight bodies who are releasing data, interpret the remaining conditions and code them into DUO so that they will be respected across those distributed research ecosystems. So just to conclude, I think it's important to, both when researchers draft consent forms for the future and when they interpret existing consent forms, that you exercise care to do this properly. That as you encode the data use conditions, do this properly, because if you're too restrictive, you're going to block access to data and you're going to slow down research. And if you do it too liberally, you're going to leak data in ways that doesn't respect participants.
All right, thank you very much, Adrian. To wrap up very briefly, I just wanted to put each of those perhaps in context with respect to a roadmap for next step in 2020. Michael told you about the work we are doing on implementing, and Jonathan as well, the researcher ID passport / library card side with the DUO side. So we're working on a real use case implementation pipeline. We're working on developing a JSON schema with notably Tony and Francis to promote consistent encoding and validation. Tiffany and Adrian have talked about DUO in plain language and consent forms, and we're finally looking at really enabling that GA4GH vision for federated search and delivery of data, for example, via beacon. So that's what's coming up soon. And again, on the next slide, I'd like to finish by just saying, come and join us. You could email Melissa, you can check our GitHub, the Twitter is there. And we're happy to answer any questions if you have any.
So all of our speakers today are joined by a panel of people who've been involved in the production of DUO, who've also been involved in the implementation of DUO. You can see everyone's name up here. Thank you to everybody who's been sending in questions via text. Please keep doing so. And at this point, Melanie and Jonathan will start answering some of those questions that we've been receiving.
All right, so we had a question around whether the recording would be made available publicly, and I think Melissa and Angela, you confirmed that would be the case. Yeah. There were a couple of questions around, perhaps more specifically for Tiffany, around using DUO at the patient level. Did you want to expand on that one, Ryan, or maybe Tiffany?
Yes. So Ryan's question was more looking at the FHIR integration with DUO and how they sort of map together. I've indicated that we certainly do use FHIR in the process of our phenotype capture systems. And in the context, so the integration of the phenotype capture and the genomic data use activity is in the context of we've got a GenFen database that allows searching of the frequency of genomic variants with specific ontologies, like clinical markers. But Ryan, did you want to expand? Is that the line of questioning you were going for?
I have a lot to talk.
I think he's gone.
I'm off the hook.
All right. There were a couple of questions. I think, Tony, you wanted to weigh in on the question around representation of data use restriction at the level of the data set versus single data elements.
I clicked the wrong button indicating that, but I've answered by text. Sorry, I've answered it by text already. Yeah, so DUO specifies conditions of use It doesn't specify what the thing is you're using. I think Duo could possibly be extended to capture that specification, but there's no reason why it should only refer to use of a data set. It could be a data record, a data element, all data on a patient, a whole database. I mean, there's no reason why Duo couldn't be applied in different scenarios to any and all of those things.
And this is Kathy Reinold at the Broad, if I could add to that. Here at the Broad, we are defaulting a particular data use code for an entire data set, but every sample and in fact every file or output that's created as part of that data set can supersede the default one. It can only be more restrictive though, not extended.
Yeah. A data set will often have many patients in it, which may have given slightly different consent, especially in more complex consenting models. So I guess you have to allow for that as well.
All right, we have a couple questions around the passport/library card and authentication. Jonathan or Michael, did you want to talk about those?
Sure. I think let me just scroll the question here about who adds and validates a library card. So right now we're seeing only specific institutions who are comfortable that they can validate a researcher's claim that they are from a specific institution. So it's these larger, you could imagine, governmental groups that know very clearly who a PI is, who a signing official for an institution is that are willing and able to do this. I think other groups do it in some ways through the signing of data access agreements and such. So it's not unfathomable, but to do so in a way that is sort of facilitated by software and easily pulling from lists. I think these are the initial groups that started, and really it's meant to be just an early version of what I think we're calling the visa types that go on the GA4GH passport. So it's only meant to be that institutional sponsorship, whereas the passport would sort of have this book of various visa types that might include things like that, but also, you know, controlled access grants to when you've had data access requests approved may fall in there as well, which again is another point of integration between the passport and Duos, where not only are you entering into Duos with your visa that says you're sponsored by a specific institution, but potentially when you leave, you're also given a new visa which says you're approved for these data sets.
Thanks, Jonathan. There's a question from Ray around tying data access and tying the data to the data access itself. Ray, you should be able to talk if you want to.
Oh, hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. So, you know, again, forgive my naive understanding. This is the first time I'm understanding about Duo. I had a question about how do we actually hard link the data to the data access. Now, does Duo have some kind of linkage between the metadata that we see in some of the data types to the data access, or is that on the implementing system?
So may I just actually texted you an answer to that. Shall I just say it verbally as well? Would that be good for everyone? So at the moment, anyone using Duo works that out for themselves within their own environment, their own technology, their own system. I do think we need a more general way to tie metadata to data. And there are technologies for that. There are kind of persistent ID systems. There's a GD system for RDA, there's others, where that persistent ID for the data is then a pointer to the data or data components, wherever they might sit, and also to the metadata, wherever that might sit. That hasn't been developed in Global Alliance, but I and others are starting to suggest we might need such a thing.
Got it. Yeah, I would be really interested to explore that space with you or a broader team.
Great, thanks. there's a question around accessing subsample in EGA, and I think Giselle just responded. You guys are faster than I am picking them up. So at the moment, it's only full data sets retrieval from resources such as EGA. Did you want to add anything, Giselle?
No, that's it at the moment. So as Melanie just explained, you can only access the data on a data set level and not on an individual sample basis, because it's just the way EGA works currently. It's everything. The data model is based on the data set. So obviously a group of individuals rather than individuals on a singular basis.
Great, thanks, Giselle. There's a question from Ronan about exploring whether DUO might be used for, I guess, search and visibility. And Jonathan, did you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, great question, Ronan. Thanks for clarifying there. I think you could potentially see the use of both DUO and the researcher identity, this passport, serving a role in letting you see certain data sets. So we've seen data custodians who are interested in maybe only exposing data sets to other researchers in their institution or perhaps in their consortium. So you could say if you had maybe a sponsorship from a consortium on your passport, data sets held in a repository which had a code specific to that institution, or maybe were in that institution's repository, kind of open, no restriction on the data set for people in it, could be had. So I think that it's most likely first and foremost on the passport side of things, but there could be additional codes in DUO which may be customized to that. But again, I think it's primarily the passport visa basis.
Thanks, Jonathan. Ronan, did you want to add anything? Or you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have two mute buttons over here, hierarchy of mutes. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for clarifying this one. I'll be happy to, again, participate in exploring those two options, and highly interested in DUOs and the way you implement that. Thanks.
Fantastic. I should clarify that we're just over the hours. However, we've had commitment from speakers and panelists to stay over if people have additional questions. So we're very happy to stay around if we can provide support. I'll remind everybody again that there's the email address from Melissa here. If you want to become involved with developing the standard, please join us. The GitHub repository is here, as well as our Twitter. So if you think of any questions later on, please do reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Melanie, the panelists were not able to enter questions into the question and answer interface.
Oh, okay.
I did have two questions. Are we allowed to ask questions?
Of course, Tony, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll just throw them both out there and people can pick up either or both. With consent, as we all know, consent needs to be informed consent. So as we use DUO to capture the consent concept and the value for it, are we going to think about what the information should be that goes along with that consent concept to make it an informed consent? That's one thing. The second thing is real world consent documents and processes are very complicated. How well do you think DUO is going to work, and people who have tried using it in real world kind of sort of healthcare and complex situations, to capture the real world types of consents that exist? Is it yet powerful enough for that, or is it just a really for sort of research data sets at the moment?
Those are two great questions, Tony. I'm tempted to punt the consent one to Adrian and the patient clinical one maybe to Tiffany if she feels.
Adrian.
Oh, Adrian had to leave.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that the consent one is something that the regulatory groups may be best equipped to address. But Tiffany, are you able to weigh in on the clinical side?
I can certainly mention in the context of our experience. So in the first question, in terms of ensuring informed consent, we've piloted the use of DUO in our participant platform in a number of clinical circumstances, including ones where there's pediatric, the parental consent for their child enrolling in research programs. We do provide genetic counselling support for our programs currently, but we're going to be moving on to a system that we're starting to enrol next year with our reproductive carrier screening project, which will be 10,000 couples across Australia, where all information materials, the whole consent process is managed through the platform, and then the data use choices made by participants will be embedded within that platform too. So that's going to be a very interesting pilot. So maybe we can revisit this conversation in 12 months and we'll see how it flies. I think in terms of, we've had a lot of interest in applications of the platform beyond the research setting and in the clinical setting. And I think as genomics becomes mainstreamed, we're going to find clinical circumstances where such tools can become embedded in consent and patient management and participant engagement and involvement processes. And I guess the exciting thing with GEO currently is that, you know, we're sort of honing it now in the research setting with a real eye on that clinical interface moving forward.
Thank you. Were there any obvious big gaps though, as you start using it for these more challenging situations? Have you already identified any big gaps? Things you had to just create yourself because they weren't available in Duo?
I will have to check with the team, Tony. I don't think so, because it is, of course, Duo, like all the GA4GH standards, it's sort of an element within a suite of other applications that we're using. But I can certainly, you know, mine into that in more detail and come back to the group.
All right, are there any other comments from either our panelists or our audience?
Melanie, I'd like to add. So to Tony's question, I've been working a bit with Adrian and the regulatory and ethics group as they're thinking about these DUO-backed consent clauses. And I can't speak much to it, but I think they're actively working on this draft of what guidance to IRBs would look like in terms of what are some suggested phrases to put into either the body of a consent form or in the appendix of a consent form if necessary, or that may be also used to kind of code in the back end of an electronic consent form, similar to what Tiffany's group is able to do. And then I think in addition to that exactly what should exist, there is sort of guidance text, which I know they are working on. I don't think they have a publicly released draft yet, but that is something that they are looking forward to. So perhaps could have an update by the GA4GH plenary at the end of October.
That's good. I didn't know any of that. So this sounds, people are working on this. It'd be lovely if we can hook each Duo term into that, you know, reference information, if you can call it that. So when people use Duo, they have a little suite of considerations, expressions, things they could add to consent forms to inform the participant of the risks.
Absolutely, and that is what they are trying to do. I think there are terms which are more straightforward and commonly known, so I think they're starting with those, and then we'll progressively sort of move down the list of maybe the less common terms. So I think there might be an early release version of some of those primary codes.
All right, any further questions or comments?
Just make sure you use that Q&A box at the bottom if you have any questions. Every once in a while I see a hand raised, but they flash up, so it's hard for us to see them. So if you have questions, please type them in the box.
All right, so while we're waiting to see if any other question pops up, I'd like to just really thank, again, the whole community, so the speakers, the panelists, the people who've attended the call today. Our fantastic secretariat who arranged the webinar and who's been managing all of these technical things. So thank you, everybody. Again, we're very happy to answer any question. We'd love to engage with you. Please send us your use cases, contribute, make sure that the standard evolves towards something you can use and you want to use. And as there are no further questions, I will call this webinar to a close. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.